Jimmy Fallon stopped mid-sentence. His hand dropped slowly to the desk. 300 people watched him forget, completely and entirely, what he had been about to say. It was a Tuesday night in October 2023. The Tonight Show, a comedy segment. Easy television. The kind of night the crew had done 1,000 times. No one in that studio, not the producers, not the band, not the writers backstage watching on monitors, understood what they were witnessing until Jimmy Fallon stood up from behind his desk, walked around it without a word, and crossed the entire studio floor toward a woman standing in the back aisle, who was trying very hard not to be seen. It was supposed to be a routine taping. October 17th, 2023. The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon, Rockefeller Center, New York. The guest was a comedian promoting a new special. Questlove and the Roots were in fine form. The audience was warm and full. Standard stuff. The kind of night that produces good television without anyone trying too hard. Jimmy walked out from behind the curtain the way he always does, bouncing slightly, grinning, running a hand through his hair. 300 people gave him the welcome he has earned 1,000 times. He moved through the monologue with ease, the way a man moves through a room he knows well. Then the interview, then the segment, then the second commercial break. Everything flowing, everything right. And then, from somewhere near the back of the studio, Jimmy's eyes found something they were not supposed to find. Not a disruption, not a sound, not a commotion, just a face. A woman standing just inside the back entrance, pressed against the wall, as if hoping the wall would swallow her, holding what appeared to be a small laminated badge hanging from her neck. He stopped talking mid-sentence, not to gather himself, not for effect. He simply stopped. His hand came down slowly to the desk. The word he'd been about to say never came. Questlove noticed first. His sticks slowed. Then the director noticed. The feed cut briefly to a two-shot that wasn't called. And then the audience noticed that Jimmy Fallon was no longer looking at his guest or his cards or the camera. He was looking at the back of his own studio with an expression that nobody in that room had ever seen on his face before. The entire studio froze. His guest leaned forward. "Jimmy? You okay, man?" Jimmy didn't answer. He was already standing up. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened in the summer of 2015. Jimmy Fallon wasn't always Jimmy Fallon, late-night institution and America's host. In June 2015, Jimmy Fallon was a man in a hospital bed at Bellevue Hospital Center in Manhattan, fighting to save the ring finger on his left hand after a freak accident at his home involving a trip, a ring, and a countertop edge that left him with a condition called ring avulsion. One of the most dangerous soft tissue injuries a hand can sustain. Surgeons worked for 6 hours. The outcome, for most of those hours, was genuinely uncertain. He was 40 years old. He had a show to host, 2 young daughters at home, and a hand that might never fully recover. He has spoken about those days in interviews with careful lightness, the way people speak about things that frighten them in ways they are still not fully comfortable naming. What he has never spoken about, what almost no one outside a small wing on the 7th floor of Bellevue knew, was the nurse who stayed. Her name was Patricia Okafor. She was 34 years old in the summer of 2015, a registered nurse in the post-surgical unit, 7 years into a career she had chosen carefully and pursued without shortcuts. She was the daughter of Nigerian immigrants who had raised her in the Bronx to believe that showing up fully was the only honest way to do any job worth doing. She was not famous. She did not want to be famous. She was the kind of person who arrived 12 minutes early to every shift and left late without logging the extra time. because logging the time, she felt, would have changed what the time was for. She had not particularly followed late-night television. She knew who Jimmy Fallon was, the way most people her age knew. The clips, the viral games, the general sense of a warm and somewhat chaotic man who seemed to genuinely enjoy making people laugh. She had nothing against him. She had no particular feeling about him either way. What she had was a patient recovering from a surgery that had gone well, but that left him frightened and quiet in a way that surgical successes sometimes do, because a near miss does not feel like a victory when you are living inside it. She checked on him more than her rotation required, not because he was famous. The chart on his door was the same as any other chart. She checked on him because she noticed on the second morning that he wasn't sleeping, that he was lying in the dark at 2 a.m, staring at the ceiling with the particular stillness of a person whose mind will not let them rest. She sat down in the chair beside his bed. She did not turn on the light. She asked him, quietly, what he was afraid of. He told her, not the hand. The hand was the surface. Underneath the hand was a man who had been running very fast for a very long time and had never, not once, allowed himself to stop and feel the weight of any of it. The hand had stopped him, and in the stillness, everything he'd been moving fast enough to outrun had caught up with him. She listened. She did not take notes. She did not offer platitudes. When he was finished, she said, quietly, the fact that you're afraid means you understand what you have. That's not a bad thing to understand. She came back the next night, and the night after that, not because her rotation required it, because she had said she would, and she kept her word. On the morning he was discharged, he asked a nurse at the station if he could speak with Patricia Okafor. The nurse at the station told him that Patricia had worked the overnight shift and had gone home 2 hours earlier. He asked if he could leave something for her. He wrote a note. 3 sentences. He left it in an envelope with her name on it. He did not know if she would receive it, or if the envelope would sit in a drawer somewhere and be thrown away without being opened. He left it anyway, because it was the honest thing to do. He did not hear back. He went home. He healed. He went back to the show. He did not speak publicly about what had happened in that room, because some things are not for public speaking about. But he did not forget. People who have been sat with in the dark at 2 a.m. rarely forget the person who sat with them. What he didn't know, what he had no way of knowing, was that Patricia had received the note. She had kept it. Not because it was from someone famous, though that was a detail she could not entirely pretend didn't register. She kept it because of the 3 sentences. Because in those 3 sentences was evidence that she had done something real, and she believed that evidence of doing something real was worth keeping. She had continued her work on the 7th floor, continued arriving early, continued staying late. In 2018, she had completed additional certification in critical care nursing. In 2020, she had worked through the worst months anyone in healthcare had lived through, on a floor that was not designed for what it was asked to do, with colleagues who were holding each other up by their fingernails. She had not left the profession. She had moved through it the way she moved through everything, quietly, completely, without asking to be seen. In late September 2023, she was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. The oncologist gave her a realistic picture. The course of treatment would be long and difficult. The outcome was uncertain in the way that any stage 3 diagnosis leaves outcomes uncertain. She was 42 years old. She had a daughter in the 8th grade, and a mother in the Bronx she called every Sunday, and a career she loved, and had not yet finished giving everything she had left to give. She did not tell many people. She told her mother, She told 2 colleagues. She told her daughter, carefully, with the same precision she brought to everything, choosing words that were true without being more frightening than the truth required. She did not, for several weeks, tell anyone else. Then, in early October, her daughter asked her, "Is there anything you want to do? Just for you, before treatment starts." Her daughter was 13. She asked the question with the directness that 13-year-olds sometimes have. The kind of directness that comes from not yet having learned to soften things into smallness. Patricia thought about it for 3 days. Then she told her daughter, "There is one thing. A friend of a friend worked in production at 30 Rock. It was not a direct line. It was the kind of connection that exists in New York, where everyone is 4 people away from everyone else." Patricia sent a message through this connection saying only that she was a nurse who had cared for Jimmy Fallon at Bellevue in 2015, and that she would very much like, if it was not too much to ask, to see the show before she began treatment. She expected nothing. Or she expected the polite response that means nothing. What she received, 3 days later, was a message asking if she could come in October 17th, and would she be comfortable if someone from the show knew who she was before she arrived. She said yes. She said she would be comfortable. She did not know that the message had been shown to Jimmy Fallon. She did not know that Jimmy Fallon had read it in his dressing room and sat very still for a long time before telling his assistant, "Make sure she has a good seat, and make sure nobody tells her I know she's coming." She did not know that for 3 weeks, Jimmy Fallon had been carrying the weight of knowing she would be there, carrying it the way you carry something you do not know exactly what to do with yet, waiting for the moment when you would know. Behind the scenes, Jimmy Fallon had made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. He hadn't told the segment producers. He hadn't briefed the floor director. He had told one person, a single coordinator, to place Patricia Okafor in the back section of the studio with a guest badge that would let her slip in after the audience had seated, so she could find a place near the back without fanfare. He had said, "I want her to be comfortable. I don't want her to feel like she's part of a segment. I just want her to be there." What he hadn't told anyone was what he intended to do when he found her. He hadn't fully told himself. But this is the moment no one in the studio and no one watching at home ever saw coming. Jimmy Fallon came around his desk. He crossed the studio floor at a pace that was neither slow nor hurried, the pace of a man who has made up his mind and is not second-guessing it. The audience, which had begun to murmur, went completely quiet. He stopped in front of Patricia Okafor. She had not moved from the back wall. She was wearing her work ID lanyard still. She had come almost directly from the end of a shift, because that was the only way the timing had worked, and she was holding both hands clasped in front of her in the particular way of a person who has trained themselves, over many years, not to appear overwhelmed even when they are. Jimmy Fallon looked at her for a moment. Then he said, his voice not quite steady, "You came." She said, "You knew I was here." "Since October 1st, he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, very quietly, "You didn't have to do any of this." "I know," he said. "You didn't have to sit in that chair." A pause. "But you did." She looked away briefly, the way people look away when they are trying not to feel something in front of 300 people, and then she looked back. "That was my job." "No," he said. "The job was the chart and the medication and the follow-up questions. What you did, what you actually did, that wasn't the job." The floor director had long since stopped calling shots. Questlove's sticks were resting across the snare, unmoving. Nobody in the production booth was talking into headsets. Jimmy reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He pulled out an envelope. Old, the edges softened with handling. The kind of envelope that has been moved from one wallet or drawer or jacket pocket to another, many times, over many years. He held it out to her. "I got your note," she said. She hadn't taken it yet. "I know you got it," he said. "I want you to have the original back. I want you to have it. Because I needed you to know that I didn't forget. And because," his voice broke slightly. He steadied it. "Because I need you to fight. Whatever comes next. I need you to fight the same way you showed up for every person on that floor. That same way." She took the envelope. She held it in both hands. 300 people were on their feet before anyone decided to stand. Jimmy Fallon did not try to speak over the applause. He stood beside Patricia Okafor, his hand briefly on her shoulder, and he let the room be what the room was. Patricia Okafor began her treatment in late October 2023. Her medical team described her response to the initial rounds as, in their words, better than projected. She continued working reduced hours at Bellevue through the winter because she said the work steadied her, and because her patients did not stop needing her simply because she was also unwell. The envelope Jimmy Fallon returned to her that night is on the windowsill in her apartment in the Bronx, next to a photograph of her daughter and a small wooden cross her mother gave her when she passed her nursing boards. It sits there in the light every morning when she makes coffee. Jimmy Fallon has not spoken about that night on television. He has spoken about it once, to one person, in a hallway at Rockefeller Center, when a colleague asked him what it felt like. He said, "It felt like paying a debt I didn't know how to pay until I saw her standing there." Patricia's daughter, who is now 14, has told her school counselor that she wants to be a nurse. Some debts cannot be repaid. They can only be carried back to the person who is owed them, quietly, in an old envelope, and placed in their hands at the moment when they need to know someone remembered.